So ayun, thank you for that, Ali. Ito ang aking report. Prisoners' dilemmas are everywhere. So ayun, ulitin ko ulit si TJ, and ito yung report na nataasan para sa akin. So ayun, after you know what the prisoner's dilemma is, you may start to see them everywhere. And don't be surprised, because social scientists do also think they're everywhere. And here are just a couple of examples where social scientists think that people find themselves trapped in prisoners' dilemmas. So ito yung mga examples na makita natin na sa tingin nila is trapped sila sa prisoners' dilemma. So ayan, countries fighting an arms race, merging from 2 lanes to 1 in heavy traffic, and price wars. So next. So ayan, dito, sa countries fighting an arms race. So if one country stops building weapons, the other gains the advantage. But if both keep building weapons, both countries wind up bankrupt and armed to the teeth. Meaning, dito sa countries fighting an arms race, pag yung isa daw as patuloy na gumagawa or nagde-develop ng mga weapons, sila yung may advantage. Meanwhile, kung parehas naman silang nagde-develop or gumagawa ng mga panibagong weapons, parehas silang mababankrupt. So ayan, makes sense naman. Next one is merging from 2 lanes to 1 in heavy traffic. If you fall in line with the other cars in the merging zone, some jerk inevitably will ride up to the merge point and get ahead. But if everyone tries to ride in both lanes up until to the merge point, traffic slows to a crawl. So ito rin, mapapansin din natin to sa problema rin dito sa Pilipinas, itong mga nagba-merge sa from 2 lanes to 1. Kasi nga sobrang grabe na yung traffic din dito, kaya nangyayari is nawawalan ng mga disiplina yung mga drivers. So mas lalong lumalala yung traffic. Imbes na mas ma-ease or malilessen yung traffic, mas lalo pinapalala ng mga driver kasi kulang din sila sa disiplina, and at the same time naiinip na rin sila or may mga lakad sila. So ayan, next is price wars. So dito, price wars. And if Mark's Donuts R Us thinks Stephanie's Donut Palace may start selling cheaper donuts, his store has to sell cheaper donuts to make sure it doesn't lose business. But if he thinks Stephanie's shop won't sell cheaper donuts, he may lower his prices to steal her customers. Of course, she's taking the same thing. So they both go bankrupt trying to undersell each other. So dito sa price wars, talagang papapansin natin yung marketing strategy ng both sides. So dito rin, nangyayari rin yan dito mostly sa Pilipinas. So ang ginagawa nila is binababaan nila yung presyo para makuha nila yung mga tao, mga market, mga customers, kasi isipin nila, mas mababa yung benta dito ng product na to. So dito ako bibili. Tapos hanggat sa nag-bankrupt silang dalawa kasi iniisip ni Mark na pag si Stephanie hindi nagsell ng cheaper donuts, bababaan ni Mark yung presyo ng donuts niya para makuha niya yung customers kay Stephanie. Pero ayun, little did he know na parehas lang pala sila ng iniisip. So ayun, nag-bankrupt silang dalawa dahil sa pag-undersell ng mga products nila. So mostly ganun din mga nangyayari dito sa Pilipinas na ganun din. So ayun, next one, and escaping the state of nature. Si Hobbes. So Hobbes' state of nature is exactly the situation faced by these prisoners. If one party to a contract believes the other won't follow through on her part of the bargain, it doesn't make sense to honor the contract. But if she does take the other party with follow through, then she knows she can get something for nothing. As long as no one is forcing both parties to follow through on their ends of the deal, it's not rational for either to keep the terms of the contract. You're back to the war of all on all, and no one can get anything done. You can see why life in the state of nature stinks. So dito makikita natin sa theory or sa state of nature ni Hobbes na parehas din sila, exactly like the situation faced by these prisoners which is tayo, parang hindi siya actual prisoners, so tayo yung prisoners na tinutukoy niya. So ayan, next one, ayan. Escaping the state of nature, enter the sovereign. So ayan, the fruitless competition in the state of nature makes it clear that something has to change. But how do you escape from a prisoner's dilemma and get people to cooperate? Hobbes thought society had only the following options. Option: choose a sovereign who has the power to settle these disputes all by himself. all by himself. Sorry for that. So, when two parties enter into a contract in the state of nature, neither can count on the other to keep his end of the bargain. But in that same situation, the sovereign could take it upon himself to severely punish any party who doesn't fulfill his contract obligations, with the assurance that the sovereign would step in on behalf of a wrong party. People would no longer fear entering into contracts with one another. So dito mapapansin din natin na sobrang halaga din ng contract kasi medyo na-highlight dito yung contract ni dun sa enter the sovereign na kaya nga escaping the nature. So dito mapapansin din natin, and when two parties enter into a contract in the state of nature, neither can count on the other to keep his end bargain. So dito mapapansin natin na hindi ka dapat mag-rely sa isa para para makamit mo yung gusto mo makamit. Okay. Next. John Locke. Sige. Dito po pala muna tayo sa sketch. Ayan. In Hobbes' system, the sovereign is protecting the interests of his people. He's helping people to cooperate and escape the mutually assured destruction of a prisoner's dilemma. But if you think about it, he's also doing something else. If agreement is the only component to ethical rules, the sovereign is also creating the conditions necessary for ethical behavior. By giving people an interest in keeping their commitments, he's actually underwriting agreements. With the sovereign laying down the law, layers of agreement can start to take root. By judging disputes, the sovereign actually creates the difference between what's right and what's wrong. So dito mapapansin natin na sobrang ethical din ng way of sa mga agreements, sa mga commitments, tsaka yung mga conditions na necessary para sa magiging contract nila. So yun, nabanggit din dito na he's also doing something else. If agreement is the only component to ethical rules, the sovereign is also creating the conditions necessary for ethical behavior. So dito mapapansin natin na sobrang essential din ng ethical behavior, hindi lang yung ethical rules. So, ayan. Next, however, the sovereign can only broker disputes as long as he's alive to broker them. And sadly, someone who loses out in a dispute may very well come gunning for the king. That gets you back to the state of nature pretty quickly. In order to counter this sorry state of affairs, Hobbes believed that people had to alienate to the king their natural right to open up a can of whoop ass on another human being. Alienating that right may seem like a pretty big price, but remember that the alternative is to go back to a state where no one is happy, where life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. You basically trade your natural rights for an escape from the state of nature. And because a lot more is possible outside the state of nature, it looks like a pretty good deal. So dito, mapapansin din natin na sobrang pretty good deal na rin yung yun na yung magiging escape sa state of nature na dinadanas nila. Okay, so next one. Okay, where are we now? Ayan. Moving to the modern form of social contracts. When people come together in a democratic society to establish a government, to enforce their agreements, they're entering into something pretty big, a social contract. The contract forms the backbone of almost all modern societies, and some people believe it creates ethical standards as well. Many of the common ethical restrictions people are used to, theft, murder, dishonesty, and so on, are all made to be off limits with the social contract. So dito sa social contract, makikita natin yung mga agreements, and then makikita din natin na they're entering something big, which is yung social contract. And yung contract daw is yung backbone ng almost lahat ng modern societies. And some people believe it creates as ethical standards as well. So yeah. Okay, so the key to a social contract is being able to rely on others to keep up their ends of the bargain. You're probably a decent person who tries to avoid killing people. But if people keep coming at you with knives and guns and such, you'll probably say, "This isn't what I signed up for," and start defending yourself. Luckily, society has a group of people hired to enforce the social contract. The police. Law enforcement makes it possible for people to conduct business, drive safely on roads, and walk down the street without getting mugged or worse. When combined with the judicial system, law enforcement essentially is doing the job that Hobbes imagined for the sovereign way back in 17th century. So dito makikita natin medyo civilized and medyo kumbaga nagiging safe na. Kumbaga in-assure nila na magiging safe yung yung lugar, and law enforcement makes it possible for people. Malaking tulong din or naging malaking bagay din yung law enforcement. So yan. However, one of Hobbes' key points, asking people to alienate their natural rights to the king, is an ideal in today's democratic societies. If you give away your rights to the government, odds are you're not getting them back. Plus, democratic societies don't rely on just one person who is in charge of the government. Rather, they elect presidents or they elect parliaments who then appoint prime ministers. So what's going on here? How can people alienate their rights to the president and then keep electing different presidents? So dito, makita din natin na medyo magulo yung time nila sa pag-elect ng presidents, at at the same time pag-elect na magiging leader nila para sa kumbaga democratic na rin kasi ng time na yun. So ayan. Ito, si John Locke. John Locke, an English philosopher, came up with the missing piece of the puzzle. The secret is a different layer between the chief executive and what Locke called civil society. According to Locke, who had a tremendous impact on the thinkers behind the American Revolution, the monarch, or in the case of the United States, the president, didn't get his right to kick but alienated to him from individuals. Instead, he got his power to enforce laws and contracts on loan from civil society. Civil society then gets its power to act from the individuals who make it up. A bit of dispute still exists about whether individuals loan or alienate their rights to civil society. Both options have their problems, but most thinkers come down on the side of alienation. If not, you would only have to follow laws when people you like won elections. So, dito makita natin yung civil society ni John Locke. Ito yung niya, yung theory niya, or ito yung parang pinopose niya na society para medyo gumanda or medyo maayos yung democratic society na meron nung time nila, So, ayan. This turn of events is really cool because if the head of the government only has the power on law, then civil society, if it doesn't like the jobs he's doing, can yank the power back. Hence the theory behind elections. Elections are decisions by civil societies to continue granting power to the head of government or kick him out or give it to someone else. So dito makita natin yung power nung sa civil society na may kaya kang kumbaga elections are decisions of civil societies to continue granting power to the head of government, or you have the power to kick him out and give it to someone else. Para dito rin natin makikita kung gaano kalakas talaga na babot sa point na pwede mo ibigay sa iba. So ayan. Next, restricting social institutions according to Rawls' theory of justice. Okay. Contact theory received a bit of an upgrade from a philosopher named John Rawls, about 300 years after Thomas Hobbes. As we noted earlier in the chapter, Hobbes defended a model of contact theory that required a king, or the sovereign, to make sure everyone lived up to the terms of their contracts. But this way of thinking is fundamentally unsatisfying for people living in modern democracies, where the most popular kings are Burger King, or Sofa King, and Elvis Presley. So Rawls attempted to merge Hobbes' social contract theory with the stress on reason from the ethics of Immanuel Kant. Ayan. Rawls' combination of these two theories was presented in a rather large book called A Theory of Justice, and it reignited philosophers' interest, contract theory, and political philosophy. Rawls had an ambitious project. He had to show that people could rationally agree to principles of justice for ordering not just individual lives but all of society. These principles form the core of a theory of justice. So dito natin makita panibago na si John Rawls na. Makita natin yung kanyang theory, which is yung theory of justice. So dito medyo in-emphasize yung mga political philosophy, tsaka yung dito rin natin makita rin natin na minerge yung theory ni Hobbes, na minerge niya para mas maging malakas. Kasi nga yung kay Hobbes, di ba, is he's making sure that everyone will live up in the terms of their contracts. So parang naisip ni John Rawls na mas maganda if pagko-combine or if mag-merge yung sa kanilang dalawa. So ayan. Raw's combination of these two was presented. Ayan, natin. So, ayan. In the following sections, you see how Rawls set up a situation called the original position and how he believes it leads to principles of justice that are far different from what's considered just in today's society. Before you go diving into the following sections, you should know that Rawls' theory is a little different from the other ethical theories in this book. In particular, Rawls isn't arguing that you should use history theory to make decisions about how to run your life. Rather, this theory applies to social institutions, and for an individual's purpose, governmental institutions rather. This is no small problem in ethics. It's one thing to say that one's own actions are ethical or unethical. It's another to say that a government's actions are just, or that a certain law is just. Governments and nations rather are much larger and more complex than individuals. So keep in mind that Rawls wants to focus your attention on things like how taxes should be spent and what the Department of Education should be doing, rather than on whether it's morally okay to eat your pet cat. So, yeah. Nakita natin dito sa theory ni John Rawls kung gaano ka-important yung society, and at the same time, kung in-emphasize niya rin dito kung paano nga ba talaga gumagana yung mga tax or saan dapat napupunta yung tax. And, which is hindi na-apply ngayong modern day society natin. Although nakikita naman natin kung saan napupunta yung tax, pero not all. So, ayan. Next slide. Ayan. Taking stock of the original position and its veil of ignorance. Getting everyone to agree on how social institutions should be organized can seem impossible. After all, many different people want many different things from their government. Some want government to help out everyone as much as possible, and others are interested only in themselves. So, dito rin natin mapapansin kung gaano ka selfish yung ibang tao and kung gaano ka makatao or people person yung ibang tao. So, Rawls thinks he has a way of bringing people together that will end up making both sides happy. He calls this way the original position. The original position is a hypothetical scenario where people of all different walks of life come together to start a society. And Rawls doesn't want to start a new society. He's just using the original position as a thought experiment. In this scenario, he asked, what kind of society would people choose if they had to start over again from ground zero? So dito, if tayo rin tatanungin, ano nga ba talaga pipiliin natin? Doon ba tayo sa magiging masaya tayo? Na merge society na iisa lang yung pananaw ng lahat? Or magstay na lang tayo sa kung saan tayo lumaki or kung ano yung nakilanan natin? So, ayun, mapapaisip din tayo dito. Kayo ba? Sa tingin nyo? Would you go to that, ayun, sa plano ni Rawls na what kind of society would people choose if they had to start over again from ground zero? Ano yung society na gusto mong piliin at bakit? So, ayan. Next one. Rawls thinks it would be more difficult for people to come to any kind of agreement about what society should be like. Business leaders would argue that society should minimize taxes. Men may argue that they should get more rights than women. Women may argue that they should get more rights than men. Racists may argue that ethnic minorities deserve worse treatment. Ethnic minorities may argue that they should be more empowered than they are in today's society. It would be a big of mess to try to recreate society this way. So dito rin natin mapapansin kung gaano ka broad or kung gaano ka complicated yung mga nangyayari dito sa sa theory ni Rawls. Ni Rawls. Kung gaano niya talaga iniisip kung paano yung mga pwedeng gawin para maayos yung society and at the same time maging united. Excuse me. So, but Rawls had a brilliant idea. What if these people getting together to restructure society didn't know whether they were going to be a business leaders, beggars, women, men, ethnic minorities, rich or poor in this new society? If this were the case, they would try to structure the society from behind what Rawls called the veil of ignorance. The only things these people would know are that they are rational and mutually disinterested. Behind this veil of ignorance, everyone is completely ignorant of their particular social roles. All that's left of people's life in their ends as rational creatures. So, ayun dito. Ayun nga, napaisip din si Rawls. What if these people are getting together, structure society that they didn't know whether they're going to be a business? Kumbaga, bahala na kung anong magiging kung magiging business leader ba ako, kung magiging lalaki ba, kung babae ba. Wala kang pake kung sorry for the word, parang wala kang pake na na magiging, kung ano magiging ka. Yun nga, veil of ignorance. Wala kang alam kung ano magiging, kumbaga, ano yung future mo. So, ayan, yun, napaisip din si Roll kung pwede ba yun. Like, brilliant idea daw siya. Kumbaga, pwede ba yun na mangyari sa modern society ngayon? Parang naisip niya rin na ano yung mga pwedeng mangyari or possibilities na pwedeng mangyari if natuloy yung ganun. So, ayan. Rawls, another thing, Rawls doesn't mean that people would literally forget who they are. He just thinks that he thinks the original position would be a good thought experiment to get things going. Because if people don't know what kind of roles they would have to fill in the new society, they may make a new society that tries to make everybody's roles better. So ayun, naisip niya rin na magiging maganda rin yun. At the same time, mahirap kasi consider the risk na pwede mangyari. So dito rin, naisip niya rin na ayun nga, di mo naman pakakalimutan talaga kung sino ka. Gusto mo lang talaga yung original position would be a good thought experiment to get things going. Kumbaga mag-work and mag-build up yung mga mangyayari sa society. Kumbaga hindi lang talaga nila alam kung ano yung magiging role nila. Kumbaga yung sa magiging role nila 50-50 if magpa-progress pa sila doon, may magde-develop pa sila doon, may mga made-develop pa silang bagay doon, or may mga discover ba silang bagay na bago na makakatulong sa society. So yeah, imagine that you're one of these people constructing a new society behind Rawls' veil of ignorance, and that you don't know whether you're going to be a man or a woman in this new society. What kinds of policies about sex and gender would you choose? Rawls thinks you would avoid some kinds of policies. You would, for instance, choose a policy that gives men all the rights and denies women the right to vote. You wouldn't choose the policy because, well, you may turn out to be a woman in the new society. Rawls thinks you choose a society in which men and women are treated equally and have equal opportunities to get all the valuable things in life. He thinks that people in the original position would naturally choose a maximum strategy, one that maximizes the benefit to people in the worst social roles. Excuse me. In other words, you don't know who you'll be in the new society, so you want to make sure the worst case scenario will be as good as possible. So, ayun, medyo talagang sobrang broad or sobrang complicated talaga ng theory niya ni Roll. At the same time, maganda rin. Kahit ako napaisip din ako, sabi ko, what if nga? What if? Di pa yun natin. So, what if na ganun yung mangyayari? So, sorry for that commercial. What if ganun talaga yung mangyayari? Kahit ako napaisip ako. What if ako, doon sa bagong society is magiging babae pala ako, and men and women are treated equally. So we both have the rights to vote, and lahat ng kumbaga gender equality talaga. So this whole setup is supposed to ensure that the outcomes of the new society are fair for everyone. Hence, Rawls named for his view justice as fairness. Rawls believed this position is a form of contact theory because the people in the original position would actually agree to structure in society in a certain way, thereby constituting principles of justice. And he doesn't stop at saying that the principles of a just society would hold for his imaginary society people would create. Because the original position models people's ideal rational selves, the principles of justice would hold for institutions in the real world as well. Thus, the original position becomes a yardstick by which people can measure the justice of actual social institutions, not just imaginary ones. So, ayan, dito rin. Pinakita rin talaga ni Roll na ayun, justice as fairness. Kumbaga talaga fair lang lahat, equal lang lahat, walang lamang, walang naiiwan, walang nauuna. Gusto niya fair lang yung rights of living ng bawat tao sa new society. Ayan. So, ayan. Yan lang siguro sa part ni Roll. So, next. Ayan. Arriving at the liberty and different principles. The original position is supposed to be the framework in which people would agree on how to structure a just society. So what kinds of structures would be chosen? Rawls believed that people behind the veil of ignorance in the original position would choose to found a just society on two principles, the liberty principle and the difference principle. Because the original position is rational, Rawls thinks people also can use these principles to evaluate existing institutions. Rawls think that people would choose these two principles because folks behind developing of ignorance don't know what social group they'll be a part of in the new society. If they aren't privy to this information, they'll want to choose principles according to a maximum strategy that gives them the best possible life, even if they wind up on the in the worst possible groove. So yeah. The following sections take a more detailed look at these two principles Rawls think people would choose. So again, the liberty principle or maximum freedom. The liberty principle goes like this. Each person has the same wait. And so the liberty principle captures something fundamental about people's interests in society. So each person has the same indefeasible claim to a fully adequate scheme of equal basic liberties, which scheme is compatible with the same scheme of liberties for all. So, ayan, medyo complicated yun. So think of the liberty principle in this way. Kung medyo naguguluhan ka dun. Ito kasi medyo complicated. Ito medyo siya, kumbaga, summary. Yeah, everyone should have the maximum number of freedom as long as everyone else has those freedoms too. Kumbaga, talagang fair lang. Fair judgment, fair freedoms, lahat kayo equal, lahat meron talaga. So, yeah. The liberty principle captures something fundamental about people's interest in society. That by and large, they like doing what they want. Freedom allows people to exercise control over their own lives and make their own decisions. Naturally, people seem to want as much freedom as well. But society can't just let people do whatever they want. Some people want to do evil things like kill others and steal candy from children. If society allowed people to do these things, these actions would infringe on other people's freedoms. If you kill someone, that person is no longer free to do what she wants. If you steal candy from a child, that child is no longer free to enjoy her property. So Rawls is arguing that people should be allowed to do whatever they want. Sorry, let me correct that. So Rawls is arguing that people should be allowed to do whatever they want to do as long as they are freer than everyone else. So kung ano yung baga karma, kung ano yung ginawa mo sa kanya, ganun din babalik din sa'yo. Dito yung argument ni Rawls. People should be allowed to do whatever they want as long as they are freer than everyone else. So kumbaga, free sila kung ano yung gusto nilang gawin, pero hindi sila katulad ng iba na kumbaga freer. So freer, may word pala na ganun, freer. Kanina ko lang din so freer than everyone else. So it makes sense naman dito sa argument ni Rawls. So yeah, if you kill someone, that person is no longer free to do what she wants. So yun nga, totoo, pag pumatay ka ng tao, wala na siya. Kumbaga, hindi niya na ma-enjoy kung ano yung mga gusto niyong gawin pa. Yun din sa bata, pag nagawa mo ng candy, ano mangyayari? Wala, iiyak. So hindi niya na ma-enjoy yung property niya. So ayun yung sa ni Rawls. So ayan. Difference principle. Oh wait, okay, dito pala. Consider this neat parenting trick that helps explain why people would choose equal liberties. Say that half a pie is in the refrigerator and that Erica and Jacobs are siblings fighting over who gets more of it. If their parents are on their toes, they may present the following compromise. Erica gets to cut the pie into 2 pieces, but Jacob gets to choose which piece he wants. In this case, Erica's best strategy for getting the most pie is possible to cut the pie into equal pieces. That way, she's assured of getting at least as much pie as Jacob. If you had to start a new society and didn't know who you would be, would you choose the liberty principle to help you make decisions? It's difficult to say that you wouldn't. If you didn't, you may end up in a group that had less liberty than everyone else. Equal liberty looks like it's in your best interest. So, yun. So, yun yung sa equal liberty. Ngayon, dumaka naman tayo sa difference principle. So, dito sa difference principle, fixing unfair inequalities, it's fair to say that the difference principle is a little bit more complicated than the liberty principle. It has 2 parts and goes like this. Social and economic inequalities are to satisfy 2 conditions. First, they are to be attached to offices and positions open to all under conditions and fair equality of opportunity. And second, they are to be the greatest benefit of the disadvantaged members of society. So dito, dalawa yung sa social and economic inequalities. So you can get most of its meaning from replacing the principle in the following way. Ito, any social or economic inequalities in society should be attached to positions that anyone can hold and should be to the benefit of the least well off in the society. So, yun nga. Kailangan na attach dun sa yung position na yun dun sa taong kaya i-handle yun or well off dun sa society na yun. Kumbaga, alam niya na alam niya na yung role niya dun sa society na yun. Kumbaga, alam niya na kung paano papatakbuhin tong society na to. Excuse me? Kumbaga, familiar na siya dito sa society na to. So, alam niya na yung mga do's and don'ts, yung mga yung mga dapat at di dapat gawin. Kumbaga, master na siya doon sa society na yan. So, any social or economic inequalities in society should be attached to positions that anyone can hold. So, ayan. So, I think that's the last part of the report. I hope na may mga nalaman kayong bago about dito sa topic na diniscuss ko ngayon. And pwede nyo rin naman siyang basahin sa libro if medyo nagulaan kayo, or pwede naman kayo magtanong sa akin kasi report ko rin naman to. So if wala namang questions or may questions kayo, i-chat nyo na lang sa chat box or message nyo na lang ako. So ayan, to proceed or to continue the report rather, I'll pass the floor now to Miss Amy Bibar.
Okay, now I'll elaborate more of the golden rule. Okay, so we will discuss the following points. So first we have the golden rule theorem. We have here the concept of knowledge and imagination, conscientiousness and impartiality. We'll also differentiate the golden rule and prescriptivism golden rule, the literal rule, and lastly, I'll give some of the example to discuss these topics clearly. Okay, next. Ayan, okay, so we'll start with the golden rule itself. So, golden rule encompasses the empathic and reciprocity essence of morality. So, we have two important words here, which are the empathic and reciprocity. Empathic in a way that you envision yourself in someone else's place. It's like you are imagining yourself to be that person. Okay, next. Reciprocity in a way that you do an action and must be willing to experience the same thing. Also, reciprocity means that the action is a two-way thing. Golden rule is considered as the most important principle in this book of ethics by Gensler, as it is also the most important rule of life. Another point, golden rule theorem. It says that treat others only as you consent to be treated in the same situation. It means that you'll only do something which you are willing to be done to you. As an example, okay, so some of us have a sibling. Sometimes we like borrowing clothes from each other. Okay, so as a sibling, I'll borrow clothes from my sister and I'll be willing to lend some to her too. That's an example of golden rule, and it happened on our daily lives, which sometimes we're not really aware of. Okay, next. Golden rule forbids the following statement. So first, I do something to another. Second, I am unwilling that this be done to me in the same situation. We can say that this person wants to do something, yet unwilling that the action will be done to him. As I've said, golden rule is a two-way thing, so this combination is forbidden. Another important point are the concept of knowledge and imagination. So applying the golden rule requires these elements. Okay, first, knowledge. So knowledge is important in order to apply this rule. We need to have a knowledge about the effects of our actions. We need to evaluate whether would it do good or harm a person. Okay, so evaluating our actions would make us understand the consequences of these actions. Okay, so that is so important to remember. Next, we have imagination. In this, we need to imagine ourselves in other person's place. Remember when I said that golden rules encompasses empathic essence of morality? So this is what I'm talking about. Okay, So you are building empathy towards a person by imagining yourself in his or her situation. And in every action, we need to ask ourselves, okay, how would I feel and react if other people treat me the same way I did? It is an important question one must ask to himself or herself. Through imagining, you are creating a first-hand analysis of how your action affect other lives. Golden rule follows conscientiousness and impartiality. We'll have conscientiousness first. Conscientiousness is keeping your actions and desires in harmony with your moral beliefs. So we have two important key terms here, the action and moral beliefs. These two, the action and the moral beliefs, must be aligned to each other. It means that you won't do something to other unless you are willing that this be done to you in the same situation. Moreover, we have impartiality. Impartial is making a similar evaluation about similar action. In this case, we won't believe that this act would be alright unless we believe that it would be alright for this to be done to us in the same situation. Okay, we have here an example of how conscientious and impartial works. So, on the top left corner says that you steal Detra's bicycle. Believing that it would be alright for you to steal the bike is an example of conscientious. In the same way, if you believe that it would be alright for your bike to be stolen in the same situation, then that is impartial. Again, since you believe that it would be alright for your bike to be stolen, then you are willing that it would be stolen. So that is a conscientious. To explain further, in conscientious, as I've said, your action must be aligned to your moral beliefs. If you think that it would be alright to steal the bike, then do it. And if you believe that it would be alright for your bike to be stolen, and again, stole that bike. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Moving on, we'll have the difference of golden rule and prescriptive golden rule. Golden rule says that I ought to do something to another. I am willing that this be done to me the same way. So this is consistent with regards to what I want to do with my willingness to experience the same way. However, prescriptive golden rule says that I ought to do something, yet I am not willing that this be done to me the same way. This is an example of inconsistent combination. The difference between the two is the willingness to experience the act the same way. Let us now move to literal rule. So it says that treat others as how you want to be treated. If you want X to do something to you, then do the same to X. Example, if you want Susie to be kind to you, then be kind to Susie. Now, this application seems sensible. It's like you do something to others that you also want others done to you. As simple as that. But literal rule can lead to absurdities in two types of cases. So we have the first. You may be in a different situation from X. For example, letter A says that as a patient, if you want the doctor to remove your appendix, then remove the doctor's appendix. I know it may sound ridiculous, but it only follows the literal rule. So in this case, we can say that both the doctor and the patient have different situation. The patient is ill, while the doctor isn't. The doctor is knowledgeable with the medicine, while the patient is currently ignorant with it. Another thing, as a parent, if you want your child not to punish you, then don't punish him. Again, the parent and the child have different situation and roles. As a parent, it is your responsibility to guide your child. These examples are considered absurd as people involved have different situation and you can't expect them to do something just the way other did. Okay? Next case. It says, You may have a defective desires about how you are to be treated. These defective desires are inappropriate for the both people involved. Example, for someone who desires to be hated, if you want others to hate you, then hate them. So I think this case is also ridiculous. From the first place, why would someone wants to be hated? Also, you can expect other people to hate you just because you hate them. Another thing, if you want to be killed by others, then kill them. This example is really absurd, as how would other people kill you if you already kill them? Oh, it is just impossible unless they will come back from death just to get a revenge and kill you finally. This example pertains to bad intentions, that's why these are considered absurd. To give a more detailed reason, let's dive into it further. Okay, earlier I've mentioned in the first case that literal rule is considered absurd because people involved have different situations. The different situations were ignored. Okay, let's have the father and the child case for example. It says, if I speak loudly to my father who has a hearing problem, but I don't want him to speak loudly to me since my hearing is normal. Let us put this in both literal golden rule and golden rule. Literal rule would be, if I speak loudly to my father, he should speak loudly to me too. We can say that this rule is inappropriate as the father and the child have a different hearing capacities. The father can't do the same, which is to speak louder to his child because the latter has a normal hearing. But if we follow the golden rule, it should be, if I were in the same situation as my father, I desire people to speak loudly to me. So I speak loudly to him. In this case, the child imagined to be his or her father. He or she realized the hearing capacity of his father and would want others to speak loudly. He then have the knowledge so he'd speak to him loudly. In this example, the concept of imagination and knowledge is evident. Another case. So let's go back to the patient-doctor appendix case. If we put this case into literal rule, it would be, if you want a doctor to remove your appendix, then remove the doctor's appendix. But if we put it in a golden rule, it should be, imagine yourself in the same situation of the doctor. The question is, are you willing to remove your appendix by the patient who is currently ignorant with medicine? I know you would answer no because I do. As a doctor who studied for how many years, I won't let a patient remove and operate with my appendix. We can say that golden rule requires same situation or exactly similar situation, because this will give you a realistic evaluation and analyzation of your actions. Next, I think it would be the last slide. Okay, here we go. I have here another situation, okay? I have a 2-year-old son named Willie who keeps putting his finger into electric socket outlet. I try to discourage him from doing it, but nothing works. Finally, I decided that I need to spank him when he does it. Now, look at the questions. In Golden Rule, it is important to ask the first question first. The first question is, am I now willing that if I were in Willie's place in the same situation, then I'll be spanked? Okay, imagine yourself as a 2-year-old. You put your fingers into electric socket outlets and the only thing that will stop you is spanking. As a 2-year-old, you don't understand the electricity, so you don't desire to be spanked. Second question, if I were in Willie's place in the reverse situation, would I then be willing to be spanked? As an adult, you can say, I now desire that if I were in this situation, then I'll be spanked. You might add, I am thankful that my parents spanked me. So we can say that question 1 and 2 differs with mentality. So in the first question, you are putting yourself into a perspective of a 2-year-old child who doesn't know the concept of electricity. However, the second question, you are imagining yourself in Willie's place, but you disregard his mentality. You still answered it as an adult despite of his age. So I think that is all for me. To further discuss the golden rule, may we have Kate? Your turn.
Thank you for that very informative report, Ate Aimee. Let us now move on to the next, which is about masochism. But before we dive into that topic, let us have an example first. So, for example, there is a masochist who wants to get tortured. So, for him to get tortured, he is going to torture another. So, if we simply put it, it would be, if you want X to torture you, then torture X. The literal golden rule, LR, can tell a person with defective desires to do evil things. Now, kung sa case ng masochist, mahirap tong isolve tong problem na to. So, how are we gonna address it? So, we are gonna use the threefold attack. So, what are these? So, first, we need to have the masochist imagine himself in the same situation as the other person. Second, we need some way to criticize irrational desires. Third, we need to recall that our general golden rule, rather, forbids an inconsistent action-desire combination and doesn't tell us what specific act to do. So, ano-ano nga ba yun? Or para mas maintindihan natin, let us move on to the first. So, for the first one, there is a masochist who wants to get tortured. So, ang gagawin niya, ito torture niya yung isang tao or other person who is a non-masochist. So, ito pwede natin sabihin, itong saying na to, am I willing that if I were in the exact case of non-masochist X, then I'd be tortured? So, typical masochists desire physical or emotional pain because this brings some sort of satisfaction for them, may it be sexual, religious, or aesthetic nature. But he wouldn't get the satisfaction if he were in the place of non-masochist X because it would only bring him unwanted pain or unwanted harm. Kasi kung ilalagay ni masochist yung sarili niya doon sa place nung other nasasaktan, hindi niya gugustuhin yung pain na yun kasi hindi naman siya masochist. So, that is the first one. Let us now move on to the second. He is filled with irrational self-hatred. So, si masochist, he hates himself so much that he wants to be tortured in his present situation in any imagined situation. So, to counteract this, we could use rational means to counter his self-hatred. We get him to understand himself better, including the source of his hatred, appreciate his self-worth, and experience positive ways of living. Now, when we develop a love for himself, this love of self could be turned into love of others para hindi na siya manakit na iba. And what if, tungo tayo sa pangatlo, what if masochists resist having self-hatred rationally criticized? Paano yun? So, the golden rule doesn't command specific actions but only forbids an inconsistent combination. Ano yung combination na yun? It is the action and the desire. So, we must not combine these two. Ito yung una. I do something to another. That is the action. Then, the second one, which is the desire, I'm unwilling that this be done to me in the same situation. So, hindi pwedeng may gusto kang gawin sa ibang tao, pero kapag yung ibang tao na yun ginawa naman sa'yo, unwilling ka na matanggap yung amount or kung paano mo ginawa yun sa kanila. So, dapat yung golden rule, ganun yung magkakatakbo. So, the golden rule doesn't assume that our desires about how we are to be treated are fine and give us a good guide on how to treat others. The golden rule only forbids inconsistencies and so doesn't tell him, the masochist, to torture X. We can be consistent and follow the golden rule but act wrongly. This can happen if we're ignorant about how our actions affect others or if our desires are defective. Yung parang sabi ko nga kanina, hindi siya consistent. May gusto kang gawin sa iba pero hindi mo tinatanggap kapag ikaw naman yung gagawin ng gano'n. So consistency isn't enough. The golden rule gives us a useful tool for criticizing certain inconsistent attitudes. So, guide lang ito. The golden rule itself is not enough. It works best when combined with knowledge, imagination, and rationalized desire. Now, let us move on to the second part of my report, which is the golden rule questions. So, for the first question, question number 1, is the golden rule widely accepted? Yes, it is widely accepted. Many endorse the golden rule and put it at the heart of their moral thinking. Many of the professionals often use the golden rule to explain their responsibilities towards others. For example, a thoughtful nurse once said, I try to treat my patients as I'd want to be treated in their place. Others, namely Jesus Christ, Confucius, and Rabbi Hillel, I'm so sorry if I pronounced that wrong, use this golden rule to summarize their teachings. While Baha'i, Buddhism, Christianity, Confucianism, Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, Taoism, and other world religions also support this golden rule. Now, this golden rule is close to being a global principle, like a norm common to all peoples of all times. The golden rule roots in a wide range of world cultures, is well suited to be standard that different cultures can appeal to in resolving conflicts. So, despite the differences in race, nationalities, religions, beliefs, meron tayong pagkakaisa or meron tayong commonality, similarity, which is nag-agree tayo dito sa rule na to, which is the golden rule. So that is good. Now let us move on to question number 2. Question number 2, how does love your neighbor relate to golden rule? So, love your neighbor and golden rule, magkaiba ba yun? Yes, they are. They are different. So, love your neighbor is about motivation and tells us to act out of genuine concern. While the golden rule is a key element in rational moral thinking. But if we love others, sa love your neighbor, love, pero hindi talaga totally love. We're motivated to care about them for their own sake. We seek to do good and not harm to them and don't do this for ulterior reasons. Ginagawa mo lang yung kabutihan na yon or ethical actions or acts na yon kasi ano lang, ginusto mo lang, free will mo lang, ganun. Pero wala siyang reason kung bakit. However, in the golden rule, it is followed out of lower motives or higher motives. The lower motives are habit, conformity, or self-interest, while higher motives would be genuine love for others. So love is the highest motive for following the golden rule, which brings us closer to moral perfection. So the golden rule needs love, but love also needs the golden rule. This gives a workable way to translate love into action. So, ang pagkakaiba nila ulit, love your neighbor is doing an act to others without a reason. However, in the golden rule, you need love or reason for you to act towards other people. Now, if you are to love your neighbor in a golden rule way, here are the 3 steps to follow. So first, know your neighbor as well as you can. Second, imagine yourself in the place of your neighbor as vividly and accurately as you can. The third is act toward your neighbor only in ways you're willing to be treated in the same situation. Paano natin ito maintindihan? Let me give you an example. For example, you're a coal mine owner who decided to convert to love your neighbor and run your mine by the golden rule. So what are you gonna do? So first, you will learn about how your company impacts the life of other people. Other people meaning your workers, your neighbors, and customers. What are their problems and issues and how they are affected. Then, you'll apply imagination. You'll imagine as a worker laboring under certain conditions for certain salary. Or perhaps you'll imagine yourself as a next door neighbor with black smoke coming into his house. So now you will be led to this question. Am I willing that if I were in that situation, then I'd be treated that way? Yun. So that is how love your neighbor works in a golden rule way. Now, moving on to question number 3. Question number 3, is the golden rule the summary of all morality? Well, yes and no, it depends. The golden rule doesn't say what specific act to do. It forbids inconsistent action, desired combinations. The golden rule captures the spirit behind morality, helps us to see the point behind moral rules, and it engages our reasoning instead of imposing an answer. It counteracts self-centeredness and concretely applies ideals like fairness and concern. Therefore, the golden rule makes a good one-sentence summary of what morality is about. The literal golden rule kasi, kung ano yung ginawa sa'yo ng ibang tao, ganun din yung gagawin mo sa kanya. But with the golden rule, which is yung tinatakal natin ngayon, which is deeper, pwede kang mag-act sa ginawa sa'yo nang hindi mo binabalik yung kung anong ginawa nila sa'yo totally. For example, inaway ka nila, pwede mo against-an yun. So, hindi mo din sila aawayin. Yun yung golden rule dito. Unlike the literal golden rule na alam natin na kung anong ginawa sa'yo, ganun yung gagawin mo sa kanila. Yun. So, next. Question number 4. Is the golden rule the same as treat others as they treat you? So, medyo nasabi ko na sa question number 3. So, the answer is no. It tells you to do good to those who do good to you and to harm those who harm you. So, nung bata tayo, medyo mali yung pagkakaintindi natin dito, di ba? Masyadong literal. Ganito yung naisip natin, treat others as they treat you. If someone hits you, then hit them back. This cycle or these actions can lead to endless revenge and retaliation. Hindi naman natin gusto yun. So, dapat ibahin natin yung pagkakaintindi natin sa golden rule. Next, question number 5. Is the golden rule the same as treat others as they want to be treated? Which is the platinum rule. Yun yung platinum rule naman. No, it is not the same. The platinum rule can prescribe evil actions. How? Let me give you an example. For example, merong isang doktor, pangalan niya Dr. Evil. Dr. Evil wants you to help him destroy the world. So the platinum rule wants you to help Dr. Evil destroy the world. So, yun yun. Yun yung pagtakbo ng platinum rule sa part na yun. Also, the platinum rule, it can prescribe self-contradiction. Example, let me give kayo. For example, there are two politicians. The first one is a Democrat and the other is a Republican. Both want you to vote for them and not the other. Sa Democrat, sabi niya, iboto mo ako, wag mo iboto si Republican. Sa Republican naman, sabi niya, iboto mo ako, wag mo iboto si Democrat. So, the platinum rule tells you to vote for both and for neither. Kasi torn ka sa gitna, hindi mo alam. So, yun. Ang kaibahan nun sa golden rule sometimes permits us to act against the will of another. In relation to question number 4, and yeah, basta nabanggit ko siya kanina. Next, question number 6. Isn't the golden rule theorem too subtle and difficult to understand? Yes, it does have subtle aspects, but we need this to avoid the objections and to show that the golden rule is defensible. Less sophisticated people kasi, or yung kung hindi masyadong pinag-iisipan to, ganyan. Kahit na bumabalik tayo dun sa literal na golden rule, ayos lang yun. At least, they are doing good things, ethical things, by thinking that kahit na hindi nila masyadong pag-isipan or hindi nila masyadong laliman yung pag-intindi dito sa golden rule na tinatopic natin ngayon. Next, question number 7. Suppose you live in a ruthless dog-eat-dog society where everyone takes advantage of everyone else. Wouldn't people take advantage of you if you follow the golden rule? Actually, not necessarily. The golden rule permits self-defense. Sabi ko nga kanina, pwede mo pa rin againsan yung rule na yon. Hindi naman tayo literal na golden rule. Kung anong ginawa sa'yo, ganun din gagawin mo. You can be against that. So, the golden rule permits self-defense. You can defend yourself against the attack of evil people in ways that you consent to others defending themselves against you in a similar case. The golden rule would limit how harshly we could treat others. So, kahit na you live in a dog-eat-dog society, makakatulong pa rin yung golden rule to have harmony and peace. Let us now move on to the next. Question number 8. What is the scope of golden rule? Does it apply just to human beings or perhaps just to our tribe or group? Does it apply to animals or things? Now, the golden rule governs the actions of rational agents. Rational, nabanggit na natin to or narinig na natin to. When we say rational, these are beings who were capable of thinking, having thoughts. The golden rule forbids inconsistent action desire combinations. The golden rule wouldn't apply to beings who can't act intentionally or can't consent to hypothetical actions. Sabi ko nga, rational, able to think. Now, the golden rule deals with how to treat sapient recipients. Sapient meaning they are able to feel and perceive things. So, sentient recipients are beings capable of experiences. The past, the present, and the future. Now, paano natin to maiintindihan? Yan. So, meron tayong quote dito. Don't step on X without consenting to the idea of your being stepped on if you were in X's exact place. This can be derived from general duties to be consensuous, meaning to live in harmony with our moral beliefs, and impartial to make similar evaluations about similar actions. This works normally if X is a sentient being, like a friend, a stranger, or a dog. So, basta buhay, may isip, nakakaramdam, being able to experience, yon, sentient beings yon. So I care about whether I be stepped on if I were in the place of any of these. Since then, being stepped on would hurt me. But for example, we would apply this to a rock. We would step on a rock, which is a non-sentient being. So for me, it's okay because it doesn't have any feelings. It wouldn't get hurt. Now, to put this or to replace the value of X, mat lang, no? Ilagay natin sa value ni X yung dog mo or kahit anong animal. So, we have this. Don't torture your dog without consenting to the idea of your being tortured if you were in your dog's space. Well, hindi natin alam kung paano mamuhay bilang aso. We don't have the subtle knowledge of being a dog, no? But here is another saying or statement where we could relate this or may similar meaning. It came from an African proverb. It goes like this. One who is going to take a pointed stick to pinch a baby bird should first try it on himself to feel how it hurts. So, both of these, or sinasabi lang neto, it suggests that we are to apply the golden rule to all sentient creatures. Basta nabubuhay, humihinga, nakaka-experience. Yun. Kailangan natin i-apply yung golden rule. Let us now move on to the next, which is question number 9. So the golden rule helps us to see our duties towards others. Are there any similar principles that can help us to see our duties towards ourselves? Yes, meron pa pong ibang principles aside from the golden rule itself. So ano-ano yun? First, we have self-regard principle. Self-regard principle is like this. We violate consistency if we treat others as we aren't willing to be treated. But we also violate consistency if we treat ourselves as we aren't willing to have others treat themselves in the same situation. Medyo magulo. To simplify, we must imagine someone we care about acting as we propose to act. So, to give you an example, for example, nanay na ako or kayo, magulang kayo. Imagine, you have so much concern for your children that you never think of your own needs, but you aren't willing that your children live in a similar way. So, hindi yun tugma sa self-regard principle. So, in this case, you're inconsistent and violate self-regard. We tend to think of people as too selfish and too little concern for others, but people often don't have much concern for themselves either. So, we are selfish in a sense na mas inuuna natin yung iba kaysa sa sarili natin. Mas pinapahalagahan natin yung ibang tao na hindi na natin nabibigyan ng halaga at importansya yung sarili natin. So, paano yun nangyari? There are various factors such as laziness, fear, habit, lack of self-appreciation, lack of discipline, etc. More and more that can drive our ways of living that neither benefit ourselves nor others. So the consistency requirements highlights the importance of both concern for others and concern for ourselves. Dito, mahalaga na hindi lang dapat iba yung pinapahalagahan natin, hindi lang dapat tayo nagbibigay ng okay sa iba. Dapat sarili din natin, dapat balance. Now, ano pa yung ibang principle na makakatulong sa golden rule? We have this, the future regard principle. So, the golden rule and self-regard principle imaginatively shift the person in the situation. We can also shift the time. Ano yun? And imagine that we now experience the future consequences of our actions. We could simply say this as, don't do what you'll regret later. To understand this, I have an example. You may cause yourself a future hangover by drinking. But when you imagine yourself experiencing it now, you don't consent to the idea of your having treated yourself this way. So, kunwari, natamad ako sa buhay ko. Gusto kong uminom ng alak, gusto kong magpakalasing. Pero naisip ko na ayoko pala ng hangover, masakit sa ulo yun. Ang sakit masyadong problematic pag may hangover ako. So, dahil ganun yung naisip mo, advance ko mag-isip, hindi mo na papayagan yung sarili mo na gawin pa yun. So, that's how future regard principle works. Simply say, advance siya mag-isip. You are putting yourself in the future para isipin or i-imagine kung ano yung mangyayari sa'yo doon. If willing ka bang maranasan yun. Next, question number 10. The golden rule is about your treatment of X. What if your action affects two others, X and Y? Let me give you an example. Example, suppose you're a store owner. You need to hire just one worker. X and Y apply, and you need to choose between them. Both are qualified, but X is more than Y. Y, who weren't picked, will be disappointed. So to make the choice consistently, I must be willing for anyone to make that choice in that situation, regardless of which place in the situation I imagine myself in. So if I were in the same situation as Y, kung ilalagay ko yung sarili ko doon, then I have to be willing that I wasn't picked by the store owner, which is me also. So, ganon nangyayari. Yung rule na ito. Or dito na pumapasok yung formula of universal law, which is to act as you're willing for anyone to act in the same situation, regardless of imagined variations of time or person. So what are these imagined variations? Nabanggit ko siya. Imagined variations include cases where you're in the place of someone affected by your action, the golden rule, where someone you care about is in your place, self-regard, or where you're at a future time experiencing the consequences of your action, future regard. So we can simply say that the universal law is the combination of these three, the golden rule, self-regard, and future regard. We could simply state this as act only in ways that you find acceptable, regardless of where or when you imagine yourself in the situation. Now, let us move on to the last question. Well, this question is not for me, but for the author. Pero para makatulong na rin, let us summarize the chapter, or let us recap the terms and ideas discussed. So, for the last chapter, we were able to discuss the 4 basic consistency principles, which are logicality, ends, means, conscientiousness, and impartiality. Where logicality is to avoid inconsistent beliefs, and means is to keep your means in harmony with your ends, while consciousness is to keep your actions, resolutions, and desires in harmony with your moral beliefs, and impartiality is to make similar evaluations about similar actions regardless of individuals involved. Now, for this chapter, I was able to discuss this, which are the 4 derivative principles. Ito yung golden rule, self-regard, future regard, and universal law. To recap, again, golden rule is to treat others only as you consent to be treated in the same situation. Self-regard is to treat yourself only as you're willing to have others treat themselves in the same situation. Future regard is to treat yourself in the future only as you're willing to have been treated by yourself in the past, which is parang present ngayon. For universal law, again, this is a combination of the 3, golden rule, self-regard, future regard. So, it is to act only as you're willing for anyone to act in the same situation, regardless of imagined variations of time or person. Now, to remember it easily, I have this abbreviation or mnemonics for you, which is by Elizabeth Murphy. It is not pronounced as Sally Fox, but Silly Fox. So, bakit naging ganun? So, according to her, fogs are little creatures that don't practice C, conscientiousness, E, ends, means, L, logicality, and I, impartiality for Sally. For future regard, for F, U, universal law, G, golden rule, and S, self-regard for fogs. Because they don't practice any of this, that's why they are silly. So, again, silly fogs. That is all for my part. Here is Calvin to continue the rest of the report. Calvin, take it away.
So, good day everyone. So, my name is Calvin Matthew Sustiger. So, I'll be the one who discuss why we must follow the golden rule or the GR. So, golden rule is the most important principle in our lives. So, because it requires that we treat others only as we consent to being treated in the same situations. So, meaning, tratuhin mo lang yung ibang tao. So, in a way na handa ka or ready ka na tratuhin din ng ganun na same situations. That's why following the golden rule is important and useful in our society because to see the differences, approaches of different ethics yan. So for example is treat others as they treat you yan. So if someone hits you back, so what will you do? So, are you going to hit them back again or pabayaan na lang and walk away? So this situation, this situation, no, so dito na pupasok yung approaches ng golden rule or yung essence ng golden rule which is to avoid and resolve yung mga social conflicts natin and avoid also yung mga revenge natin, yung mga retaliations natin into other person. So golden rule set as a standard na ma-avoid yung mga social conflicts natin sa society. That's why people find acceptance. So next one is promotes cooperations. So, following the GR or following the golden rule promotes also the cooperation, so which benefits from the everyone because it allows to people and to the group to work together, so to achieve a common goal and derive from the mutual benefits. Yan, so following the golden rule also make us feel good about ourselves and bring us the respect to the other people and admirations to the others. And next one is violation of GR brings penalties, so including social disapproval and alienation from others. Yan. So for example, so nakagawa ka ng hindi kaaya-aya or masamang gawain sa iyong kapwa, so nagkakaroon ito ng mga social disapproval or yung mga social conflicts. Yan. That's why dito na yung pumapasok ulit, just like what I said. So dito na pumapasok yung approaches ng golden rule, which is to avoid yung mga social conflict and resolve yung mga social conflict na nagkakaroon sa society. Yan. That's why di rin naiwasan yung mga ng isang tao, yung mga guilt and yung mga lost respect nila sa sarili nila dahil nakagawa sila ng masama sa ibang kapwa. So nagkakaroon sila ng feel of guilt, and yung feel of guilt sa mga nagagawa nila when they violate the golden rule. Yan. So the next one is the God's law. So as you can see, so ba't napasok dito yung God's law sa topic ng golden rule? So according to the Matthew chapter 7 verse 12, so in everything, so do to others what you would have them do to you. So meaning, so if may ginawa sa yung kapwa mo ng mabuti, so i-return back mo to as good thing din, no? So reverse situation lang, no? So because God's want us to love one another as brother and sister. Kaya naman may kasabihan nga tayo na kapag binato ka ng bato, so batoy mo ng tinapay, no? So sama mo na rin ng palaman, no? Para mabusog siya, no? So kidding aside, no? So yan, so in every all matter, so kahit na anong masamang gawin sa'yo, so i-return back mo siya as good thing, no? Because God wants this kind of thing, no? Yan, kaya naman pumapasok dito yung God's law sa golden rule. And last is the moral language, no? So following the golden rule help us to construct or build us in a moral language, no? So dito na pumapasok yung valuing the different kind of life, just like for myself, for my family, and for the other people. So valuing others is important because it is seeing the difference as something a positive. So positive income siya because it is a means to trying to understand how others think and feel, and knowing that, so in time, so this will help you as well as them, no? So in reality, so mayaman or mahirap man yan, so dapat i-value natin sila or i-appreciate natin sila as one or as same as human, no? And yan, so following the golden rule help us to build a good moral language natin to the other people. Yan, kung paano natin sila ma-appreciate, kung paano natin sila ma-appreciate and tignan ng same as a human, no? Yan, that's all. Thank you.